Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to bring you another round of Stabby reviews. This includes the genres of horror, thrillers, and true crime. These are just the books I've been reading recently, so I do have some recommendations for you all, but also a couple of rants. So hopefully you are here for it, and all that being said, let's get started. First, let's start with horror, starting with Hacienda, and this is a piece of historical horror that follows a young woman who is betrothed to a man and goes to live with him. This book is set at the end of the Mexican War of Independence, and if you know me, I don't actually read very much historical fiction, even in the terms of horror, so this is a little bit outside my wheelhouse. It's also a piece of Gothic horror that is compared to both Rebecca as well as Mexican Gothic. Now, I definitely got Mexican Gothic vibes from this, because if you're looking for a story with a strong female character, and of course those Mexican cultural elements woven throughout the story, you will get that. And I really appreciate that as a Caucasian reader. I'll admit some of the references went over my head. There were words that I did not know, but they caused me to either look them up or just kind of figure out the meaning based off the context. And I do like books like that aren't necessarily meant to kind of spoon-fed things to a white audience, but instead is really meant to be an own voices story and give you a better idea of the culture, but really be written for the people of Mexican descent that are looking for themselves in horror. So I think that the book did a really good job in that aspect. I did find those aspects very interesting. What I struggle with is the fact that this book is very Gothic. Now, I definitely see with the synopsis why it's compared to Rebecca, but I haven't actually read Rebecca, so I can't comment on how true or similar it really is. But I will say I like this book, but it was awfully slow. So again, I appreciated it. I was kind of intrigued. There was something in the house and you're like, okay, is the house haunted? Are the people the issue? And there's strange things that start to happen to the young woman. And so again, it kind of has like that Mexican Gothic feel to it. But unlike Mexican Gothic, this one just felt, again, much more historical, much more slow paced, and really leaned into the Gothic elements. And it just isn't my taste. So I am impressed how much I like this book despite that. So I think if you like historical fiction, if you like Gothic fiction, you'll probably like this one a lot more than I did. I'm not the best one to review this just because it's not my thing and it was really slow and I didn't totally love it. Next, we have The Legacy of Molly Southbourne by Tade Thompson. This is the third book in the Molly Southbourne trilogy, and I believe the final book based off of how it came together in the end. But this is a book I received from a review from Tor.com, and I've read the first two novellas, so I'm going to keep the synopsis, of course, spoiler free. The first book starts out with you find a young woman who has a strange ability that every time she bleeds, it creates another version of herself, and that version is evil and goes about trying to kill her. And then the second and then this third book here just continue on with that narrative, and you get to see how Molly has to survive and how that really affects her life. So I will say that this book is very weird. It's very unique. I think if you're someone who is tired of reading the exact same tropey horror story over and over again, this is a good one to check out. It's very character focused, it's very thoughtful, it kind of has some feminist themes around it, and I just thought it's very enjoyable. And I will say that I'm not always a fan of horror series. Often while I enjoy a horror book, I'm happy to have it stop there. But this is a series that actually came together really well. I thought the second book was pretty good, but this third one really tied it up in a way that I found to be very satisfying without giving away too much. So I would recommend the series, but you will want to start back at the beginning. They're only novellas, so it doesn't take long to get caught up and read the third one. Okay, moving on to thrillers, which also means moving on to my first rant. I read The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager, which actually doesn't come out for a little bit, but everyone else is reviewing it way ahead of time, and I only have the ebook to review from. So I decided to read it early and chime in like the rest of you. The basic synopsis is that we follow a woman who is at a cabin and she sees something across the lake, and the story goes from there. I was skeptical when I heard that synopsis because it basically sounded like The Girl on the Train, but just on the lake. And I know that technically Riley Sager does get a lot of his inspiration from other horror and thriller books and kind of purposely kind of reinvents those different books and kind of plays into the trope. So I do realize that that's a thing he does, but this one just felt oh so predictable, and more so just really, really boring. I'll be honest, this might be my least favorite Riley Sager book, which says a lot because I really did not like the book he came out with last year, Survive the Night. And I still have major problems with that book, don't get me wrong, but at least it was exciting. I had problems with the plot twists. I thought that they were dumb, but at least I was entertained, or at least invested. I wanted to know what was going to happen next, and I found myself turning the pages. This was so boring. I had to push myself to read it, and I just didn't care. I have no opinions, thoughts. Normally I do standalone little short, like 5-minute reviews of Riley Sager's books for my channel, but I can't do that this time because I have so little to say about it. So if you've read it early, love to hear your thoughts. Of course, keeping it spoiler free in the comments, so add some spaces if you're talking spoilers. But yeah, I would not encourage anyone to pre-order this one. Get it from your library if you have to check it out. But as someone who has in the past been a huge Riley Sager fan, I feel like he's kind of running out of ideas, and personally I think that he needs to go another path and stop trying to reinvent his older books and take his writing in a different direction. Just my opinion as a reader. Then switching over to true crime and nonfiction, I want to talk about Sleeping with a Psychopath by Carolyn Woods. And this is a memoir, but crossed with true crime, that follows a woman who encountered this man. He was handsome and charismatic, and they started a whirlwind romance. She realizes that he is very rich, and soon enough she realizes that his business is a bit of a front, and what he tells her is that he is actually a spy. And the story goes from there. However, as the title suggests, she starts to believe or discover that perhaps he is actually a psychopath. That's the synopsis, and here's what the book actually is. It's about a woman who meets a man, and he cons her out of her money and gets her involved in his other con schemes, and she ends up getting in trouble with the police. And so she writes a memoir to try to get herself out of trouble and explain herself to the public, because this has all come out in the press apparently. I was hugely disappointed. First off, let's start with the book title, which is amazing. Sleeping with a Psychopath, why is that not a thriller novel? I want to read that right now. And the fact that this was based off of a true account, I was so excited. So where those references come from is the fact that the author points out different psychopathic traits that she feels that this man had. And so yes, maybe he does fit some of the boxes of being a psychopath, but he has never been diagnosed as one from actual professionals. And really what he was at the end of the day was an abusive con man. So I was just really disappointed because I felt like I was misled from the synopsis, from the title. Everything about the book was one thing, and then you find out that it's just a simple con, which, don't get me wrong, it's still horrible what happened to her, but she didn't even come across as very sympathetic in the book. The way that she tries to explain herself throughout the story just made her more and more unlikable, and it's hard as a reader not to see the giant red flags that everyone else in her life was seeing. Literally all of her friends were saying, this guy seems like trouble, get out, and she didn't believe them, which I know happens. But as a story framed to be Sleeping with a Psychopath, it was so disappointing, it was so misleading, and I'm saving you all the time. Skip over it. If you see it at the library, don't read it. Then I read Trails by Kathryn Miles, and this is a true crime account of a dual murder that happened out in the outback of the United States on a trail. There was two young women who it turns out were actually lovers, so they were both lesbian or queer, and within the story you find out that they were brutally murdered. And what it is that the author of this story is reinvestigating the case years later. At the time of the incident, the police believe they identified who the person was, but weren't able to actually bring them to justice or put them in prison based off the evidence that they had in the trial. However, the author is reinvestigating the case and possibly comes up with a different scenario of what happened and who might be behind it. And I found the book to be very, very compelling. First off, I'm of course used to reading books that are set in an urban setting, and I do like that the author took the time to really point out the challenges of trying to solve a case that happened outdoors, and specifically outdoors in the woods. So for instance, even if someone is hit and killed with a rock, there might be thousands of rocks surrounding the victims, and trying to find the actual one that was the weapon is just impossible, or at least very challenging. And then there's the issues with the environment and all of the different politics around rangers and all of that. So I found that very fascinating because it was something I've never heard about and just felt very out of the box. So I would recommend this true crime book to those of you that read a lot of true crime and are looking for something different. As for the case itself, it was quite compelling. As I mentioned, it's quite gruesome, and there is a question of whether or not it was driven by a hate crime because the women again were together. But the book really pays good respect respects to the victims, really fleshes them out. And I do like that while there's no true answers in this book, the author again does provide a really compelling narrative. They basically rip apart the prosecution of what the police went after and suggest a different narrative, which again is not proven. Nothing has come of this at this time, but it's very compelling that this is a possibility of what happened and kind of getting to follow it through. So I thought this one was really interesting. I read it in a few days. And again, if you're looking for just a really interesting out of the box case, this is one I would personally recommend. I should mention I got the audio via the Libro FM review program, and I always have a link down below if you do want to check them out. I believe you get a free month if you've never had a subscription before, and then it also gives me a credit, which allows me to read and review more audiobooks for you. So thank you so much. Last is a little bit out of the box as well, and that is From Russia with Blood by Heidi Blake. And this is a piece of true investigation that was originally done by BuzzFeed, and then it was compiled into a book, and it follows the acts of the Kremlin over the past years. And I should mention that this book is actually a couple years old, so this is not completely relevant to the modern day of like what's happening today with Ukraine. But I believe this book is written around like 2017, so it's still obviously recently modern, gives you an idea of what has been going on in the background. So essentially this book looks at Putin's rise into power, how he got into the place that he was, and his background, and then it makes a lot of interesting claims tying different suspicious deaths of Russian people with different Russian ties that died overseas abroad in the UK and even once in the United States, and how these deaths assumingly were orchestrated by the Kremlin, or specifically by Putin. And this is a book that was really, really compelling to read. The word I want to use is juicy. It felt like reading a spy thriller, and if I don't forget to ask, I would really love some recommendations for fictional spy thrillers. So if you have any that you think are really interesting and might appeal to me, please leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear that, because it felt like I was reading something that was almost, again, fiction, not nonfiction. The criticisms I've seen of the book is one that I can't really validate or talk to as much, is the fact that a lot of people kind of point out that a lot of what's in this book seems to be very unsubstantiated. And I did find myself wondering how the authors, even with all the investigation they promised they did at the beginning of the book, how they were able to give so much information about what the different spy agencies in both the UK and in America were doing, because it seems like it's a lot of classified information about a lot of spies. So I'll be honest, I wasn't entirely sure how true all of this is, and I think it's a lot more speculation than actual fact. But again, if you're someone who just likes a really compelling story or narrative, this is really eye-opening. So I do think with everything going on in Ukraine, I am trying to kind of, get a better understanding of the history and backlog of all of that. But if you're going to read a book like this, I have to say you got to give it a grain of salt and just kind of take it with a bit of skepticism. I have no doubt that the Kremlin and Putin are capable of everything that is in this book, but it's not technically substantiated to the best of my knowledge. But was it a compelling narrative? Absolutely. I could not stop listening. I did the audiobook, and yeah, I could not stop listening because it was so addictive and just jaw-dropping everything that happened, if it actually happened, the way that they describe it. So again, if anyone's read this, if anyone is more familiar with the backstory behind this, I'd love for them to chime in, because I don't pretend to be an expert. This is a little bit out of my wheelhouse, a little bit out of what I normally talk about on my channel. But again, it was a piece of true crime or at least a true crime journalist writing that felt like fiction, which was definitely very compelling to a reader like myself who was just fascinated by all sorts of weird things. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to hear of the books I talked about. Which ones are you planning on checking out for review, and are there any you're planning on skipping based off of my rants? I would love to hear about a book that did not meet your expectations, a book that kind of misled you with a synopsis and turned out to be something else. Love to hear all the negative thoughts in the comments down below. If you're new to my channel, I do read a lot of horror thrillers and true crime, as well as science fiction and fantasy. You can help me out if you want to share this video around online, give me a thumbs up. You can drop a comment, even if it's just a little emoji like a detective hat or a shoe. I don't know. I don't get this emoji thing, but it really helps the algorithm apparently. Anyway, if you're still around, don't forget to hit that little notification bell so that you never miss a video from me. Otherwise, I'll talk to you again soon. Thanks for watching. Okay, bye-bye.